Right, well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming to this last of our Can You Dig It events for the year. A quick rundown, I always do it, as you know, a quick rundown of the Galloway Glens. For those of you who don't know, it's a 5-year scheme, core-funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, with the aim of connecting people with their heritage, natural, cultural and built heritage. It's here in southwest Scotland, rural southwest Scotland. From, if you know the area, it's from Carsven in the north, down through the Glenkens, out past Loch Hen, through Castle Douglas and out to the sea at Cookubry. It's an absolutely beautiful part of the world, and we're very lucky to be here. And as it turns out, lots to find out about the natural and the built and the cultural heritage of. We're halfway through, it's a 5-year programme. Our midpoint was September this year, so we've got 2.5 years to go. And there's 36 headline projects, which when the matched funding comes in, will mean an investment of £5 million to the area over the 5 years. So it's a big deal and we're really trying to make the most of it. Can You Dig It is one of those 36 projects. It's our community archaeology project, match funded by Historic Environment Scotland. So very grateful to those guys, and the National Lottery Heritage Fund allow us to put on all these programmes for free. Obviously, last year we did quite a lot of digs and excavations. We were planning to do them again this year. That had to go by the board. So we've transferred online. We've got some online projects that some of you might have seen, and we've had this programme running through the year. So I wrote down a few things, Claire. We started it in May 2020. I think it's fair to say we did not know what we were doing. I'm not completely sure we do now, but we're a little bit further forward. We've done 15 events since then, one a fortnight since May 2020, all focused on the really special history of the Galloway Glens. And we've had some amazing speakers. I'm not going to go through them because I can't go through them all. And it's not fair to miss any one out. But I personally have been astonished by the breadth and the depth of the knowledge of the people in and around this area, and the passion for it. We've published all the recordings on our Galloway Glens YouTube channel, and over the course of those 15 events, we've given away 3,200 tickets, which, if I think about last year when we were pleased to pack out Cookubry Parish Hall or the Dalry Town Hall, you know, the reach of these events has been really amazing, and we've particularly enjoyed our visitors from overseas, and we've particularly enjoyed our core community of regulars. It's been lovely to see the same faces coming every fortnight, so all of your support is very much appreciated. I want to say hello for last time this year to Claire from Rathmel. You all know Claire now, I think, the senior archaeologist at Rathmel Archaeology, who are delivering the Can You Dig It programme for us. Claire's been an absolute stalwart through this, so it's been a delight. So that's fantastic. With no further ado, I can say welcome you to Cathbad and Olaf. Cathbad has learned his lore for a count of years more than can be reckoned on fingers plus toes. He loves the legends of the ancients, hunting boar with Irish heroes, and has drilled through a thick skull of stone to steal potent draughts of Dvalin's drink. He tells stories at campfires, churches, and in longhouses, and he's in his monastery just now, I think. Olaf is a storyteller, but Olaf is also a girl. She didn't want to get married and take care of the home. She wanted to travel, have adventures, and tell stories. But in the Viking age, skalds and storytellers were men. So Olaf travels disguised as a man and tells stories by the fireside in exchange for a place to sleep by the fire and a hot meal. She loves stories full of magic, mischief, and misadventure, and sometimes dragons.
Hello.
Hello. So, Cathbad and Olaf, we're delighted to have you here.
And we're delighted to be back. It's nice to see so many people from so many places. Hello to you all.
Aha! I'm unmuted now. So my secret cannot be revealed.
Well, I didn't say a thing, Cathbad.
It's always dangerous, isn't it? Telling stories, you never know who's going to be listening.
Lesson well learned, Cathbad. Lesson well learned. How are you this evening, Cathbad?
I'm very well, thank you. Although it's a bit later on in the day than it was the last time we were telling stories.
Because it's dark outside.
Aye. It's like the sort of nights are drawing in. It's good to curry down in our longhouse. But well,
Have a nice sleep, perhaps.
and when you're asleep, do you have nice sleeps? Is your mind quiet and everything's still when you're sleeping?
No, I have dreams. I have lots and lots of dreams. And recently I had a terrible dream. I don't know if anyone listening has had a terrible dream. Add your comment and let me know, but I'll tell you quickly of mine. I dreamt that a hairy spider jumped into my mouth. And try as I might to pull this spider out, it managed to glue itself to the back of my mouth. And when I pulled it really hard, it burst. And I can vividly remember the taste in my dream, and it was horrifying.
That's a bad dream.
It's not the worst dream I've ever heard.
There are worse dreams than that.
There is a dream that led to Ragnarok.
Oh, okay, now Ragnarok is the twilight of the gods, the end of time, the scorching of the seas and the burning of the land.
Yep. Spoiler,
okay.
Your favourite gods usually die.
I could see how that could be a bad dream. Are you going to tell us about it? Would
you like to hear about the worst dream?
Yeah, because then all my dreams will feel much better.
Well, this is a tale about a god that some of you might not know. And his name is Balder. Now, if you don't know who he is, I'll tell you. He is the most handsome, the most beautiful, the most beloved of all the gods. He's the son of Odin and Frigg, and he is tall, and he is handsome, and he is strong. And he carries with him such a beautiful and bright energy that he lights up any hall that he enters. And he has a hall of his own where he lives with his wife Nana. And in their hall they feast and entertain in their great hall. And after the night's festivities have drawn to a close, it's time for bed. And they go to sleep. Only recently, Balder had been having terrible, terrible trouble sleeping. He was plagued with terrible dreams, something lurking in the dark, in the shadows, stalking him. The dreams each night grew more terrifying. He was being chased by a dark force that he just couldn't see. His wife tried to calm him. He would often wake in the night screaming, drenched in sweat, with his eyes wide in terror. And she would calm him and soothe him, and he would fall asleep again. But soon as he closed his eyes and fell asleep, the creature, the force, the entity would begin the chase again. Now, days turned into weeks, and the fatigue and the fear began to show on Balder's face. His normal bright and beaming complexion, full of sunshine, was turning grey, and he looked like he'd aged 1,000 years. This led to his mother being concerned, as any mother would. She noticed pain on her son's face, and she asked him what was wrong. Balder broke down and told her everything. The darkness, the fear, the creature, the thing that was just out of sight that he couldn't see, the utter dread of closing his eyes. Now, Frigg was obviously concerned. This was her son, and she shared it with her husband Odin. And Odin, having the power of wisdom, deemed these terrible dreams may be something bigger, and he called a council of the gods. And the gods discussed the dreams, and they decided that they may be of a prophetic nature, perhaps an omen, a warning that something terrible was to come. Yeah. They needed wisdom. They knew they needed to seek advice from a seeress. And she lived pretty far away, and the journey was quite tough. So there was no argument as to who would go. It was Odin. He mounted his 8-legged steed Sleipnir, and he set off to the underworld. The Viking underworld, where those who don't die in battle go, a place called Hell. Now, it was an arduous journey, challenging, terrible, grueling terrain, but the 8-legged steed made short work of it and travelled so fast They made good time and even managed to race past the hound Garm, who guard held gates, before Garm even knew they were there. Now, Odin dismounted his horse and he began to search for the seeress. She lived inside a barrow, a huge burial mound, and using his wisdom, Odin started to search. But on his way, he noticed there was a great hall in the distance, and he could see that it was lit up on the inside. And he approached it carefully, and he looked inside, and it was the most beautiful of sights. It was laid out for a feast. There was decoration everywhere, long tables decorated with golden cups and plates and food. And Odin thought nothing of it really, because he had more important things to do, and he moved on. Now, he eventually found the barrow, and he closed his eyes, and he mumbled some words, some incantations to wake the seeress inside from her slumber. She came out of the barrow, and she looked to Odin through her long grey hair, and she said, "I know why you've journeyed here, Odin, but you will not like what I have to say." And Odin willed her to speak. He explained everything of Balder's dreams. What did it mean? Is it an omen? Is my son safe? What should we do? And Ceres took a long, rasping breath before she spoke next. On your way here, Odin, you pass a hall being prepared for a feast for a guest of honour. A newcomer will be here very soon, and this feast is for him. This newcomer's name is Balder. Odin gasped, his heart sank, and he begged, was there any way to save his son? But the seeress simply replied, it is his fate, and even you, Odin, cannot change fate. Odin knew now this indeed was a terrible omen, but he could not allow this to come true, and he raced back to Asgard to tell the other gods. The gods were confused. Balder was loved by all, so who possibly wished to harm him? And they argued at length, which the gods tended to do whenever they had something serious to discuss. Some wanted to hide Balder, some wanted to protect him with magic, and Thor, well, he wanted to go and smash some giants because he was pretty sure it was all down to them. But it was Frigg, with her mother's love and her desperation, that found the solution to save her son. She would travel round the 9 realms, and she would ask every living thing, every dead thing, everything in existence to swear an oath that it wouldn't harm her son. And she set off across the realm. And she asked the giants and the elves and the dwarves. She asked men, women, and children. She asked earth, air, fire, and water. She even asked the plants, the animals, the mountains, and the valleys. She asked disease, old age, and bad luck. And of course, she asked swords, axes, spears, and knives. And every single one of them promised never to harm her son. When she was finally done, she returned home with joy in her heart. She knew now her son was safe. But that's when the fun began, because a new game began in Asgard. And after such a dark time, it brought some much needed levity. Balder had now found he was invincible. He could not be harmed by a single thing. So the gods took it upon themselves to throw a variety of things at Balder and have them bounce off, leaving him unharmed. Now, there was little things at first, and it was a huge source of amusement to the gods. And it started off with a small rock, or a pebble, or a little branch. But it soon escalated, as these things tend to do. And before long, they were throwing rocks and logs and boulders, and then it was tables and chairs and benches and pretty much anything that wasn't nailed down. And before long, you guessed it, out came the swords and the axes and the spears and the arrows. And each time, the chosen missile would simply bounce off Balder and land on the ground. Now, the game carried on for many, many days, and Asgard rang with the sound of laughter. It was a fantastic place to be. But in the shadows, watching quietly, was Loki. He'd always been quite jealous of Balder. He'd always envied the way that Balder was loved by everyone, and now it was even worse because Loki's jealousy turned the deepest shade of green that you can imagine. And Loki began to think. Now, this is never a good thing when Loki starts to think. It means that he's coming up with a plot. And any plot that Loki comes up with, well, hasn't really shown to be a good thing in the past. Loki was a shapeshifter. So he changed himself into a little old woman with a bent back and a walking stick. I mean, after all, I'm sure there's no stories out there in the world that tell you to be afraid of a tiny, frail old lady. Loki, as the old lady, walked past Frigg's hall in Asgard and started to cough. You know, the dramatic way that we all don't cough at the moment out of fear. But she did, drawing Frigg's attention. And Frigg ran out of the hall to see what this poor, frail old lady was doing. And she made her sit down and she gave her some water. And they sat down together and began to talk, as women do. And they began talking about nothing really to begin with, just normal things, until they heard the burst of laughter from nearby. And the lady said to Frigg, "There's so much laughter in Asgard these days. Is there some kind of celebration going on?" And Frigg, innocently, of course, explained all about Balder's dream and how she travelled down and around the 9 realms to protect her son. The old lady thought the story was amazing, and she said, "You really managed to have every living thing, every dead thing, everything in the world swear an oath, and nothing refused?" And Frigg said, "Well, nearly everything, except just this tiny little plant, and it was too young to swear an oath, and it was far, far out of the way, and it seemed like it would be harmless, really." This was all that Loki needed to hear. He politely said his goodbyes, and he left Asgard, and we all know where he went. He travelled to this tiny island to find this innocent little mistletoe, and when he found it, he cut a piece of the plant off and put it in his pocket and travelled back to Asgard. When he returned, he found the gods were still playing the very same game, and Loki's hatred and jealousy brewed even more. And Loki looked around, and he noticed, standing alone in a corner, was Balder's brother, Odin. And he looked sad. So Loki walked over and asked him what the matter was, and Odin replied that he couldn't take part in the game because he was blind and he couldn't see where to throw. At that point, Loki's jealousy and cunning combined to create a terrible plan. And innocently, he said to Hodor, "Why should you miss out on all the fun? I'll find you something to throw and I'll guide your hand. You shouldn't miss out just because you're blind." And with that, he took out the mistletoe, sharpened it into the dart, and he placed it in blind Hodor's hand. He pointed the hand in the right direction and told Hodor to throw it. And throw he did. And it struck Balder in the chest, and Balder fell. Now, this wasn't what the gods were used to, and they went silent. It was so quiet, it was as though the world suddenly ended. Then there was nervous laughter and cries of, "Come on, Balder, stop joking around, get up." And everyone thought it was just a game and Balder would soon be up with a belly full of laughter, but he didn't get up. And it wasn't until his mother ran over to try and rouse him that they realised something was really, really wrong. Frigg let out a blood-curdling scream and she began to sob uncontrollably. But it was too late. Balder was dead. And the gods began to wail and cry, and the grief washed over them like a tidal wave. But Frigg, with a mother's love, refused to accept this. She believed that she could still save her son. So she asks for a volunteer to travel to the underworld to speak to the only person now who could save her son, the ruler of the underworld, a woman named Hel, Now, one of the bravest of the gods, Hermod, steps forward and he says, I will travel to Hel and I will convince Hel to free Balder. Hermod is given the horse, Odin's horse, Sleipnir, and he sets off on the grueling journey, the journey we talked about earlier. Do you remember the scorched landscape, the fiery fields? And again, they managed to run past Garum, the dog that protects Hel, without him even knowing they were there. And he makes his way in through the entrance of Hel, and he finds the hall. And there he finds Balder, sitting, his head bowed, looking grey and tired. And on the chair next to him is Hel, the ruler of the underworld. Now, half of her is a beautiful woman, and half of her a terrible blue monster. Hermod pleads his case to her, but she is not easy to sway. Impassioned pleas have no effect. Begging does not work. But eventually she agrees to a sort of bargain. She says, if every living thing across the 9 realms can cry for Balder, I'll let him leave. But it must be every living thing. Now, this is great news because Balder's the most loved of all the gods. Everybody worships him. And the gods are overjoyed when Hermod returns with the news. This would be easy to achieve. So they send out messengers across the 9 realms and they ask every living thing to weep for Balder. And every living thing does. Except for one. A giant. An angry, nasty, bitter giant whose name is Thok. Now, Thok refuses to cry, and when he walks away, he just turns with a wry smile. And as often in these stories, all is not what it seems, and I'm sure some of you can guess that Thok was not really a giant. It was Loki, using his shape-shifting power yet again to make sure Balder could never return. So it was done. Balder was gone and would remain in the underworld, and the gods had lost the brightest, most beautiful sun. And Asgard mourned, and the time came to say a final farewell to Balder. The funeral was attended by those from all realms, the elves, the dwarves, even the giants. Balder was placed upon a pyre inside a great ship, and alongside him were placed all his treasured possessions. And when the time came, Thor strode forward with his mighty hammer Mjolnir, and he blessed the ship, and then placed his hand on the edge to push it out to sea. But it wouldn't budge. He pushed, and he pushed, and he pushed until he was red in the face, but he could not move that boat an inch. Some say his grief was so strong that his strength was weakened that day. So instead, the gods had to ask for help from none other than a giantess called Hyrrokin, who rode in on a giant wolf with snakes as reins. And with one hand, one push, the boat slid into the water and began its journey out to sea. The archers on the beach drew their bows back, loosed the arrows containing fire, which landed on the boat, and the pyre went ablaze. Now, let's just go back to that moment with Thor. Thor couldn't push the boat out, so you can imagine he was furious. Not only that, a giant managed to push it out instead of him. So the victim of his rage was a poor dwarf who walked by at the wrong time as Thor aimed a kick at this dwarf, who flew through the air and landed, unfortunately, in the funeral pyre. And that was the last that was heard of him. And then the gods said their goodbyes, and they returned to Asgard to mourn for the longest time. But it was not long before the truth was uncovered by the gods. But what happened next? You'll have to wait a little bit longer to find out.
Fabulous, exciting. Bit of a cliffhanger there. I should have said before, there's going to be opportunities to put questions to Olaf and Cathbad. So if anything comes to mind through the storytelling, then get them into the chat. We can hear that. Olaf, you're slightly muffled. I wonder if you could be a little bit closer to the mic. Yeah, but I think, are we going to find out what happens now?
Soon.
Oh,
Well, I got some questions.
Oh,
Because like Loki, yeah, he's always causing mischief. But he does get the gods out of a number of scrapes.
yeah.
Is he? Yeah, is he like a benefit? Is he good? Is he bad?
Well, he has. That's a really good question, Kath. But he has done some good things. Obviously, he was the one that got the gods all of their gifts. So he's the one that got Mjolnir made and Odin's spear, Freyr's golden bristled battle boar, the ship that folds up and goes into your pocket, all of those things. Although, to be fair, at the start of that story, he does cut all of Thor's wife's hair off.
Yeah. And he doesn't actually do any of the making himself. It's
No.
not like he's a smith god. He
No.
tricks dwarfs into working for him for no reward.
Yeah.
Other
And
than the fame, I suppose.
got the walls of Asgard rebuilt, but he did it by tricking someone out of what they were entitled to. So I kind of like to think of Loki as, a lot of families have a black sheep in their family, someone that's a bit naughty, and you forgive them all the time, don't you? But hopefully no one with a family member like Loki. But yeah, you tend to let the people in your family away with a bit more than you would a stranger, wouldn't you?
Well, I suppose, yeah, there is a story I heard of, and that meant that Odin treated Loki almost like a foster son, or that even they were blood brothers. So yeah, you let kin away with stuff because the tragedy of killing kin is even worse. No, well, I've disappeared completely now. And I was about to ask her about Loki's children as well. So if I shout loudly, can you hear me, Olaf?
Can you hear me?
Aha, I can hear Olaf. That's good. Oh,
it's these terrible trolls. We've had them all day.
yeah.
Loki's children. Okay. Yeah, Loki's children. Yes. Which ones do you mean, Caspar?
Well, you mentioned one of them already, didn't you? He had three, and one of them was, she was a lady, wasn't she? Like his only daughter, I think.
Well, here's the thing. He had a wife, a long-suffering wife. Imagine being Loki's wife. She must constantly be standing behind him, rolling her eyes. And she has two sons with him.
Mm-hmm.
Loki had a bit of a sneaky affair with a giant.
Sneaky affair, or like this is a polygamous society, and if you're a mighty warrior, you can have as many wives as you can afford to feed and keep happy and have your ear bent by.
I'm not sure Loki's wife would feel that way, but we'll see. But anyway, this giant was a particularly scary giant, and her name was Angrboda. Her name even sounds terrifying. So yeah, they had three children that he kept secret for a little while before the gods found out. And as you can imagine, a giant and Loki pouring all of their hate and their malice into three children. It's never going to end well, is it?
So Hela then, or Hel, you're suggesting that she's not quite the beautiful maiden that all poets desire and all warriors want to embrace as they can fall down to their deaths.
No. The first of Loki's children was the girl Hela, or Hel as she's more commonly known. Gets a bit confusing because of the place Hel, but Hel is her name. She is written as half beautiful woman and half blue or half monster. Doesn't always say which half, but she's pretty gruesome. She is brought before Odin when Odin finds out about these monstrous children, and Odin decides that she has to be cast into Niflheim to lord over the realm of the dead. So she will look after people who don't die in battle.
Okay, well, that's pretty bad. Are the other two of Loki's children worse?
Yeah.
So, well, what's the next worse? Even more. What could be more worse than like a walking half corpse? I suppose. Yeah. I always try and work out like top half good, bottom half dead. split down the middle?
I like to think she's split down the middle.
Okay.
But yeah, the next one, well, kind of like a little cute snake.
Oh yeah. Like, I know people keep pet adders in pots.
So
And
think 1,000 times that size,
oh,
with red glowing eyes and huge venomous teeth.
not a house pet then.
Really not. So this one was brought before Odin as well. And Odin was rightfully afraid. And he decided to find a new home for this one, this child whose name was Jormungandr.
Big home, very big home.
Jormungandr was lifted up and thrown into the sea, where they say Jormungandr is so long, he reaches round all of Midgard and bites his own tail.
Oh, yeah, I've heard at the end of things, it's not just his own tail that Jormungandr's going to be biting. He's going to be biting.
Spoiler alert. Just think, Cathbad, when you jump out of your fishing boat and you're walking along the sea and the waves are lapping at your feet, that could be Jormungandr moving out in the deck.
I don't like the sound of that. Okay, so it's got, like, what is worse than that? What is worse than a massive serpent that surrounds Midgard?
Okay, the third monstrous child. Are you ready? A wolf cub.
Yeah, it's not monstrous. Like, if you hunt with wolfhounds, that's not monstrous. Nah, well, it's a little puppy.
That's what the gods thought too, and that's what led to what happened next.
Go on.
They brought the three monstrous children in front of the gods. Hel was banished to Niflheim to reign over the dead. Jormungandr was thrown in the sea, and they looked at this little wolf cub and they thought, it doesn't look too serious, but let's keep an eye on it and we'll keep it here in Asgard. Now, when I said little, talking about little in a god sense, so probably about 6 feet tall as a puppy with big teeth.
Like a pony.
Yeah, like a pony wolf.
Yeah.
And he was so scary as a wolf cub that the only god who was brave enough to beat him was Tyr.
Of course, Tyr, the mighty war god.
Yeah.
He's a battler. He's a smiter, a swinger of steel. Yeah, that's fine. I can see how they get on.
And they built up a lovely bond over the years. Tyr would hand feed him, and it was really nice until the wolf kept growing and growing and growing, and they started to worry that they would not be able to control this wolf. So it was decided they needed to tether it.
Oh, like a dog lead.
Yeah. Except
okay.
Think great big metal chain.
Links as thick as my arm?
Yep, absolutely. And it's not going to go quietly, is it? Like, hi, Fenris Wolf, will you please let us bind your legs? So they had to make it appeal to his ego. So the gods approached him in Asgard one day and they said, let us settle a bet, Wolf Cub. Some of us think you're the strongest in Asgard and some of us think you're not.
Obviously, the wolf is going to be the strongest in Asgard. Yeah, anything you've got, I can take it. I can gnaw through whole legs with one bite.
Yes, just like tying the dog up in the yard. That's exactly what they thought. So they appealed to the arrogance within the wolf cub's personality, because remember, this is Loki's child, and they said, there's no way that you would ever be able to break out of these chains if we tie you up. So he presented his paws and they tied him up and they said, well, show us what you can do. And what do you think happened?
I think Fenris shrugged a bit, lay down, begged for food because I was hungry, and then went, and there was shrapnel all over Asgard and bits of metal embedded themselves in trees.
Everywhere.
So disastrous that even the wind of it blew the candles out in Olaf's longhouse.
It was a really cold wind there. But yes, so the chains were broken. And of course, Fenris' chest swelled with pride, his head got massive, and he now truly believed he was the strongest. So Odin, being the wisest, quickly came up with another plan and said, that was just the first test. That was a chain so easy that a child could break it. Tomorrow will bring you a much more suitable challenge. So the next day they bring an even bigger chain. Massive. With
Links as thick as my waist.
Well, yeah. And they present this to the wolf and say, come on, anyone can break out of this. And they appeal to the arrogance in his nature. And again, the wolf presents his paws. They wrap him up. And what do you think happens, Cathbad?
I think the wolf lay down, asked for some more food, because he's always hungry, shrugged, considered whether it was worth breaking or not, and then stood up and stretched, and the chain went flying in shrapnel around Asgard. And then he went,
yeah, and all the gods dived for cover. So at this point, gods are terrified that he should not have been able to break out of that chain. So they decide to ask for help. Now, who makes the best things in the Nine Realms?
Dark elves or dwarfs, Dwalin's folk.
Exactly. So the master craftsman. So Odin goes and he explains the situation to the dwarfs, and they say, aha, we can make you something that will work a treat. And they work through the night. And the next morning, they present Odin with a little ribbon.
What's this? I wanted a chain and you're giving me a ribbon? Come on.
Exactly how Odin reacted. And they said, aha, but this ribbon is a special ribbon, and it's made of special ingredients. It's made of the sound a cat makes when it moves, a woman's beard, the roots of a mountain, the tendons of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spit of a bird.
Oh.
Yeah, and that's exactly how the gods looked. That look on your face right now, yeah, they were not happy with this at all. And the dwarves explained this is a special kind of magic, and the ribbon was made out of things that do not exist. A woman has no beard, a mountain does not grow roots, and a cat makes no noise when it moves.
Or maybe those things aren't seen anymore because they're all used to make the chain.
Hide up in the ribbon, I like it. So they take the ribbon to the wolf and they think this is going to be easy. If the wolf lets them put the chains on, he will definitely let them put the ribbon on. And they present the ribbon, and instead of saying yes, the wolf goes,
hang on a minute. Where's the honor for me if I break this string? And what are you trying to do?
yeah, he thinks there's some sort of magic or trickery there, and he refuses to break this. He thinks that there's magic involved, and he says, how do I know that you'll let me go if I cannot break this? So we have to come to some sort of agreement.
So what sort of agreement could they work out?
They said, if one of you place your hand in my mouth, I cannot break this rope, and you do not release me, I will bite off the hand.
But hands, without hands, you can't wield a sword, you can't lift a drinking horn. They're important things. Who'd be brave enough to put their hand in the mouth of Fenris?
Wolf is danger. So they agree, and the bravest of men, Tyr, steps forward and offers to do this, knowing that the wolf will not break this rope, knowing he will lose his hand.
So
the wolf places his paws, takes Tyr's hand in his mouth, and they bind him with the rope. And then Fenris wriggles and wriggles and stretches and tries his best, and he cannot break out this ribbon. He realizes he has been tricked, and when he slams his jaws shut, he swallows Tyr's hand whole.
Not good.
Kind
Not
of,
good at all.
kind of brings new meaning to the word hand feeding. They had the wolf bound, so the next thing to do was to make sure he was kept somewhere safe. And they did this by taking him to an island far away, driving a stake deep into the ground and tying him to the stake. And he's there now, right now, waiting for the day that he gets released.
So when we see more women with beards and the cats start stomping around making really loud noises and the fish start blowing really big bubbles and all the other things, we start seeing them appear. Does that mean that the chain is losing its magic and the end of time is approaching and Fenris might escape?
And if he does escape, then we know it won't be long until Ragnarok.
Now that would be a bad day to be sitting in a field. Thanks, that's awesome. Loads of really good answers to just a few simple questions. See, ask a storyteller a question and you end up with a story. Are there any other questions out there?
I have a question, if any more are coming in the chat. What happened to Tyr?
Well, he's such a ferocious warrior that he didn't need another hand. But do you mean what happened to him in general?
Well, yes. Was he all right?
Yeah, oh, he was absolutely fine. But when he got to Ragnarok, let's just say, don't get too attached to him for the final battle.
Once you've had an appetizer, you like coming back for the main course. Cuchulainn from the Irish legend could throw a spear with his foot. And it was the belly spear that would explode into 1,000 barbs if you tried to pull it out again. So, you know, there's a few tricks a warrior can have.
It's dangerous times. Brilliant. Well, no questions just at the moment. I'm very much enjoying Vicky Ray's comments, not least because she's dialing in from Sydney, Australia, and it's 7:15 in the morning. So, Vicky Ray.
I think something popped up about Dvalin.
Yeah, from Amber. Yeah. Did you say Dwalin when mentioning the dwarfs?
Yes. People who tell stories learn from people who tell stories. And if you've ever heard of Fili and Kili and Bifur and Bomber, they're all in a footnote in a story that was written in Iceland. And Fili and Kili are Filer and Sharpener. And Bifur and Bomber are Fatty and Stupid or something. I'm afraid I can't recite all the names. But Dvalin is also described as being the father of dwarves. And that story has lasted a long, long time and has been taken and given new life in different forms.
Fantastic. I think we've got a bit of an update on Frederick's rabbit there as well. Give us a wave, Frederick. Is Lego's name?
That's a good
Yes. Pure half-blood descendant of pure Gotland rabbits. Excellent.
So would you like another story? Like, we've got a third story we can tell you.
Yes, please.
Aha, okay. This one is fun. Just as we were all gathered together in a longhouse, sort of, a massive house, this story takes place in the hall of Aegir. Aegir is one of Jotun. He's really old, maybe as old as the ocean. And his house has to be big because, well, he would go to feasts in Asgard a lot. And the Aesir always complained that he never asked them to come to feast in his house. And his response was always that he didn't have a kettle big enough to boil all the ale it would take to treat the Aesir and the Vanir and the elves with the honor they deserved. Yeah, I got a small kettle here. It's good enough for boiling, making me some porridge in the morning. So in another story, Thor and Tyr, they go to Tyr's father's house and they bring back a kettle that is a mile wide in diameter. And that is big enough to brew enough ale to hold a feast. There's also a really unfortunate fishing trip takes place in that story, and Thor shows that you don't really want to take him out in the boat because he'll put his foot through the bottom of it. But anyway, they're sitting around in the longhouse telling all these stories and talking to each other and drinking from a cauldron that's a mile wide. So they're getting a little bit tipsy. And the whole feasting hall is filled with a golden light because Aegir uses gold to warm the food. Maybe it's all the gold that's been thrown in as gifts into the water. Who knows? And as well as the ale, there's also the sweet river of horn nectar, mead, that flows into their drinking horns. It should have been an amazing feast. It should have been the best of times. But, well, Loki was a bit of a bad drunk. He I don't know, maybe it was the wine, the thing which makes small men think they're big and makes big men fall over flat and stupid, or brings out the bad in people. And Loki had a lot of bad stored up in him. He'd been good at jokes, but he'd had his mouth sewn shut for being too cheeky. And after that, whenever he smiled, his smile was just a little bit crooked because he'd had to go and rip all of the stitching out, and the gods had laughed at him. So this time when he was being drunk, he was being bitter and twisted. And he went out the hall for a bit, and then he came back in again. And when he came back in, he just went straight for Njord, the god of the sea, and called Njord a coward to his face, pretty much. Njord responded in a very measured tone and said, if we weren't guests in Aegir's hall just now, I'd have you for that. Loki, on a bit of a roll and with just a little bit too much mead in his bloodstream, said, if you were a warrior, you wouldn't have thought about it. You'd have just hit me if you were a real warrior. At which Njord's wife, Skadi, stood up and said, here, Loki, have a drink, have a seat. We're all feasting here. And, well, if somebody had more honor than sense, or just a little bit of wisdom rather than cunning, they would have sat down then. But no, Loki has to turn around and make horrible accusations at Skadi. Mostly Loki's accusations were that Skadi was not loyal to Njord. Shall we say that? So one by one, Loki insulted the Aesir, and didn't just insult them in the way that drunk men will often shout at each other, or even drunk men will shout at each other around in a feasting hall that shows that they are actually good friends, because insults. And if you can insult somebody, then you can have camaraderie and you can challenge people to become better than they are. But no, these were pointed, barbed insults. The women in the hall, they would try and calm Loki down by handing over drinks. But whenever they did that, Loki would question their fidelity, question their morals, question their desire for their men, and suggest that they desired other men. To which a warrior would stand up and say, fair enough, you know, it's okay to have a love interest every now and then, but Loki, your love interest involved horses. And who are you to call other people cowards when you yourself have become a child bearer? And for the warrior culture, that's one of the worst insults you can ever do. So Loki is now angry, drunk, and bitter. And Frigg, matron of the Aesir, turns to him and says, look, it's time for you to go. If my son Balder was here, then he would escort you from the hall and make sure you didn't come back again. At which Loki turned round and said, oh yeah, Balder? You're wrong to have faith in him. I've already taken out Balder. And you know why he's not in here with us? Because I was the one who stopped him being released from Hela. He's in Hell's domain because of me. Your son is nothing. At that stage, the doors of Aegir's hall burst open and in walked Thor, who's been silent in the story so far because he was off in the east hunting giants, swinging his hammer around, doing that sort of thing. And when Thor came in, Loki's mood changed a lot because Thor, when Thor threatened that he was going to beat Loki into a pulp, had the means to do it. And also Thor is not known for his caution, wisdom, or respect for hospitality. He slew an entire wedding party where he was the bride. Loki has probably been backing away from the door all this time. And when Thor steps forward, Loki saw a chance to slink out. And Loki didn't just slink out, Loki ran, and Loki found the highest place he could in the mountains. And he hid there in a house which he built with 4 doors and 4 windows, so that no matter what direction people came from, he would see that he was being chased. And during the day, he dove into a deep pool and changed into a salmon and swam around there. And then at night, he would climb up, shape change back again, and he would sit in his house round the fire with a string, making a net with a special knot, a net knitted with a special knot that would not stop anything. No, it would catch everything. This was a net that he'd learned the trick of from his mother, Ran, who sails the sea, dredging dead bodies from it with a net that you can't escape. And he'd used it earlier in his life to capture a treasure. And you can learn about Otter and Spafnir another day. But he sat and he pondered his successes and he knitted his knots and made his net until one evening, when he was almost finished the net, he saw torches on the far hilltops. And looking out, he saw the Aesir finally having found him and coming close for the kill. So he threw the net onto the fire and jumped into the water and changed into a salmon and swam around, slinking, hidden his silver skin sliding over stones. The Aesir found the house, and Kvasir, looking at the fire, saw it was not long out and saw traced in white ash on the fire a pattern of knots. So guessing where he would have gone, because, well, Odin was on that adventure that he'd used the net before, they started to knit a net out of knotty linen. And they made a net too. And then they went down to the river. And you had Thor on one side of the river, and you had all the other Aesir on the other side of the river. And they started to drag the net up the river from the sea to the waterfall, a beautiful waterfall, a glistening waterfall. But Loki hid down the bottom of the river between 2 stones, so the net slid over the top of him, and he was sleek and sly and started to swim away. The Aesir didn't give up though. They knew that Loki was in there, so they tied rocks to the bottom of the net so it wouldn't lift off the ground. And again, Aesir on one side, Thor on the other, they dragged the net down the river, this time heading out towards the sea. Loki swam before the net, and he saw that it was too close to the bottom. He couldn't try the same trick twice. He swam out towards the sea, and he saw that there were things in there that would like inhale him. He was so small, great sea beasties that would make short work of him. He swam back to the net again. He swam to the sea, swam back to the net, swam to the sea, dove down, and then swam up and jumped and flicked his tail with a salmon flick over the top of the net, splash, down, swam up, and swam back into the pool and hid again. The gods thought. And they came up with a new strategy. And this time, half the Aesir held one side of the net, the other half of the Aesir held the other half of the net, and Thor walked up the middle of the river like a half-netter. And the rocks scraped along the bottom of the river. The Aesir strained on the net. Loki swam in the pool. He swam up to the net. That wasn't working. He swam down to the sea. Didn't want to go there. The net came closer. He swam up, he swam down, he swam to the surface, he swam to the ground. didn't know what to do. He swam to the surface, he swam to the ground, he jumped out of the net, out of the water, and over the net, and Thor grabbed him with a mighty hand. And from this time on, salmon have always got very thin tails because Thor gripped hard with a mighty grip. But instead of bashing Loki's head off a rock and taking him home for supper, because that would be most undignified, they let Loki turn back into his normal shape. What is normal? And they decided to work out what they were going to do with him. So they took him to a cave deep in the ground that went back to the roots of Jormungandr. Nope, not Jormungandr. Irminsul, Yggdrasil, the great world tree. And they took counsel there, and they decided to work out, well, Loki is Odin's foster child, brother. You can't just kill him. But what good had Loki done? He was very cunning. And then they thought, well, Loki's got 2 sons. They are his offspring. We'll bring them here and we'll work it out from that. So they brought his 2 sons, Vali and Narfi. Yeah, Vali and Narfi. And they stood them in front of Loki to work out whether Loki's offspring, his offspring in Asgard with his first wife, his official offspring, would be good. And when they did that, Narfi turned into a wolf. All the ravenous, desiring, covetous, ancient, all-consuming evil that led to Fenris, perhaps, became wolf-like and ate the other son. Well, when I say ate, ripped out his belly so his entrails spilled all over the ground. Well, that was pretty much showed where Loki was going to go. So the Aesir decided they needed to do something about it. And they got 3 stones, flat stones, and bored holes through the middle of them. They sat them on their edge in the cave. Then they took the entrails from one of Loki's sons and changed them into steel, into ropes. They'd got a little bit better than when they were binding up Fenris. And then they laid Loki on the stones, on the edge of them, at his feet, his shoulders, and his middle. And they took the sinews and they bound him to the rocks. And then Skadi, the giantess, who, well, was still probably a bit sore from the slighting that Loki had given at her flighting, got venomous snakes, and one in particular, and wrapped it round a stone above Loki's head so it would drip venom onto his head. Now, after all this, Sigyn, Loki's wife, stayed true and faithful and honourable. And she sat there with a bowl or a shell and caught the venom in the shell. But every 9 drips, the shell was full and she had to take it to the side and pour it. So now, if there's an earthquake, if the whole of the world shudders from the roots of Yggdrasil, then that's when Sigyn has taken the bowl away and the drip of venom has hit Loki's head and he's writhing in pain. And the sinews bound to the rocks, bound to the roots of the earth, shake and shudder until they are released at Ragnarok, when all bonds break, brothers fight brothers, and the earth is scorched with a fire from Surtr's sword. Which would be the end of all things, but for now it's just the end of the story. Thank you.
Well, that was brutal.
Well, this is the late night version of the story.
Yeah. Those were the times they lived in. That was excellent. So good. I had a question. It's gone. You got a question, Olaf?
Me?
Yeah. No.
I just love that. I love, because it's 2 stories combined and it's just brilliant.
Yeah, really good. Vicky Ray made a point about that his Midgard serpent son would have been in the water with him, so that maybe gave him pause for thought as well. Get him in. Yeah, brilliant. Well, has anybody got any questions? I think, has anybody got any questions they'd like to put to Olaf and Cathbad about life as a Viking? because here they are, travelled through the centuries to talk to us. I can see a little game. Is that down there, Cathbad?
Aye, this game goes by many names. Yeah, you can see it. Cool. There's a Welsh version called Throwboard. So from that name, we can guess that maybe a dice was used. Nachtafel is the name it's most commonly known as. And you have a king in the center who's in his longhouse, and there's 4 doors out of the longhouse. And he's surrounded by his huscarls and surrounded by double the number of enemies, and he has to escape. And recently, they've been looking around the Great Army and where it was camping in the north of what is now England, and finding playing pieces like this. And perhaps they become a tag. So when you were a warrior in the army, sitting around the fire all day, when you're not fighting, you can make pieces like this. You could put a wood peg in it so it could peg to a board. And then you've got travel games. It's not all about fighting, although you could say this game is a training game.
Yeah.
Some of the best players of Nefertafel we know are children. And one of our particular Viking children, we will not play Nefertafel with her because she's a sore loser and she has been known to swallow the king if you're winning.
Very good.
If your game is to capture the king, then
solves that problem. We've got some questions coming in now. What's the difference between Utgard Loki and Loki?
Olaf, that's your one.
I don't understand the question, so over to you.
So the story about Utgard Loki is one of my absolute favourite stories. It's wonderful. So Loki is Loki. Utgard Loki is a giant in the story. Now, from everything that I have read, now I am not a literary expert. I know as much as the books I've read, which is a fair few, but he's just a giant. And he has quite a lot of magic in the story, so much so that he tricks Thor almost every step of the way in the story. So Utgard Loki is just a giant in another story. Loki, the actual Loki plays such a small role in that story. He just tags along to try and keep Thor out of trouble. And strangely enough, doesn't play much part in the proceedings. But yeah, short answer, Utgard Loki is a giant.
Utgard is so if you think of Asgard, it's the guard of the Aesir. Utgard is the outside the walls, kind of the wildness. Asgard's been tamed, and so he might be the Loki that's untamed too. And Loki and Logi have a conflict in that story.
Yes.
The eating competition.
It's a fantastic story. I would highly recommend reading it.
We had another question. We had a question from Vicky, was asking what happened to the Midgard serpent. She wasn't. Yeah. Oh, there's a story there.
So we've got a Jormungandr fan.
What happened to Jormungandr is told in the Tale of Ragnarok.
If you are a big fan of Game of Thrones style of writing, then you'll like Ragnarok.
The fishing trip that I mentioned in the story that I told involves an encounter with Jormungandr because Thor goes fishing, but instead of using a worm for bait, he uses the head of the prize bull of Heimri the giant, and he uses rope instead of line and throws it down into the sea. So you've got this giant bull's head, which Jormungandr bites on. Although the person rowing the boat decides to make a quick exit. And Jormungandr being wrapped around the world, it's a bit difficult to reel in. So there's a stone in Cumbria where the story is carved, and it's a stone in a church, and there's a boat, and it's got Thor's foot stuck through the bottom of it. Yeah,
Penny said that, and I think you did touch on this, but Vikings were polygamous. Did you get to have more wives if you had more money, or if you had high status, or are those two things linked anyway?
Status and money are linked. Money is not quite how many people think of money. Money is status. But there's various law codes that I don't know so much about. But the story of Njord and Skadi is a story of an alliance. Njord is married to Skadi, and that brings peace between two warring factions. If you've got a king who can only marry one wife, then you've only got one warring faction that can be made peace with at the time. And everyone's living in the same house anyway, so a lot of things that you might think of as being private are not really all that private. And individuals don't really exist. You're made up of your hearth troop and your family and your relationships. So the more relationships you can have, the more resilient your society is. Although human beings are not known for being the most peaceful to get on with. So you have laws to limit the destruction and the first wife and protect the position of the first wife. Olaf, do you have any more about that part?
No, the best thing about being a wife in the Viking Age is that you could divorce your husband if he wasn't up to scratch.
Or show too much neck in public?
No collarbone.
Is that true?
There was a law written somewhere once.
Wow.
That's the interesting thing. Like the laws are written because people are doing things, so that laws are quite a good way of us working out what actually happened. Keep some good questions pop up. This is great.
Yeah. What else have we got? Jim Greenwood suggested that the game seemed simple but got more complicated. I think that's quite often the way with these strategic games, isn't it?
Oh, it's brilliant. You can actually download it from loads of different places, and it'll even show you how you can draw it out on a piece of paper, and you can just use counters from other games just to get the feel for it. It's a lot of fun.
Fabulous. There's some book suggestions being swapped around, and I know that I've had some come through on Facebook as well from somebody very sportingly, so we'll make sure those all go out on social media tomorrow. We'll post them in the event for sort of further reading about books.
You can definitely make recommendations.
Yeah.
My pile right next to me.
Oh, I know a riddle.
Uh-oh.
What eats books but gets none the wiser for it?
Fire.
Not true. This one crawls secret and sleekit through the leaves, eats books and is none the wiser for it. A devourer of words, but with no mind.
Don't know. make my brain hurt. Bookworm. Yeah.
The bookworm, yeah.
I see.
If your books are made out of vellum, then all sorts of things will find it interesting to eat them.
Oh, very, very good. All right, lovely. They're getting a few more actually now in. Would you say Viking society was primarily a warrior or a farmer society, or maybe even a merchant society?
I think it was a bit of all of them, really. I think it's really, really difficult to understand, well, from my perspective, what Viking society was really like, because you're basically trying to build up a picture of a society from archaeology, which is great, but it tells you a lot, but it doesn't tell you how that society actually was. And all the written sources are from later on. The only thing we have that I'm aware of that's close to the time period is the Poetic Edda, because the way that the poems are written, they believe they could be quite old. But I think it's difficult to tell. Caspar will know more.
I agree completely with what you say. I suppose the only thing I would add is in order to have warriors, you need to have a lot of farmers. And to have the luxury of smithing out a sword and to, to get good at using it, you need to have other people looking after the farms. So maybe you move more from being a farmer to being a manager of many farms. You don't really have standing armies at the start of the Viking era. And it's more somebody who's got a bit, hoovers up all of the second, third sons and heads out on a longship on a wrecking tour to see how much gold they can get and bring it back. And once they're on the boats, they're kings in their own domain. And if they're lucky and they get wealthy enough, then when they go home, people kind of drawn to them like magnets, and they become a jarl. So you got this kind of pirate top tier, supported by many, many more Northmen, Scots, Britons, Angles, Saxons, and takes a while for the glue that holds societies together in larger groups to come back in.
Questions about warriors are always really interesting, because I find even from the most learned historians down to, you know, reenactors and stuff and everyone in between, no one can seem to fully agree. There's so many different opinions out there. And I guess until we build a time machine, we'll never 100% know. But everyone would have had a role, everyone.
Yeah, fabulous. Benjamin said, did the Vikings have a similar celebration to what we now think of as Christmas?
My short answer again is anything written in terms of the way Viking culture that I've come across has all been from Icelandic writing, which was later period. So from an Icelandic point of view, I think we can be reasonably sure about the celebrations they had. But from a Scandinavian point of view, I'm not so sure.
No.
It sounds really boring to say this, doesn't it? But it's really difficult to have definitive answers from the Viking age.
Oh yeah, I don't. We're getting right into the detail of it here. Viking society was not feudal, so at what point does it become so? Cathbad, any thoughts on that?
Without going into the detail of Udal law and feus, from the Scottish perspective, the Treaty of Perth is really important. That's 1264, I think. And in there, you have the Kingdom of Scotland becomes strong enough to say, if you're living in the Western Isles, you're now living in the Western Isles, the Hebrides, not the Southern Isles of Norway. Scotland as we know it becomes Scotland. And from then on, the Norwegian kings sort of cease raiding. You've still got pirate activity in the Hebrides until people can put cannons on boats and sail up and just park themselves outside a fortress and bombard it. And that is when the sort of centralizing authorities manage to have enough control over enough area and enough wild area that it shifts from being a kind of, if you have a jarl and you have his force, then they can be pirates. But then that would be thinking of the understanding of Viking as more being shipborne aristocracy rather than, who rather than having kingdoms have a network of alliances. You could say the Trelleborg forts, or the fort that Frederick was describing, it is more of a feudal type thing. And think of the Vikings as being a last resistance against the Christendom and Charlemagne's rebuilding of something that's like a Roman Empire.
Fascinating.
That was a bit muddled, sorry.
No, it's very interesting, isn't it? And like Olaf says, you know, we'll never know for sure. So we can only just piece it together from what's been left behind. I'm wondering if we could be cheeky. Have you got another little story up your sleeve somewhere? Something you could share with us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were we thinking of Skadi and Njord, Olaf?
That's a short one. So is the fishing one that you mentioned.
Thor goes fishing.
I feel like we should be doing paper, scissors, rock.
That would never work. How about we do we could do Skadi and Njord as a duet almost, a bit like we did the middle story.
Oh, yeah, they'll need to have we need to quickly explain why the story takes place.
Okay, right. I'll start off the explanation and then you can bring in Skadi.
Right, brilliant. I love Skadi, she's phenomenal.
All right, so the story starts with a dispute over picnic food and Thor, Loki, and Odin nicking some cattle, which then leads to a deal made between Loki and a giant called Thassi, which then leads to the kidnapping of Idun and her apples, which then leads, and this is the significant part, to Loki flapping like a falcon as fast as he can over the walls of Asgard and crashing down, and then Thassi, the great eagle, I always say a sea eagle because they're a barn door of birds, coming over the walls, hitting the fire and being burned. So that all that's left of him is stars in the sky. So Thassi is dead. Everyone is sitting in Asgard feasting, all the Aesir. Loki is a hero because he's rescued Idun and her apples. They're feasting when the storm clouds gather, lightning forks from the mountains and the snow starts to fall, and outside gets a little bit colder. Is that a good enough entrance for Skadi?
Perfect. So Thiazi is dead, killed by the god. But back home in Thiazi's tower is his daughter, Skadi. And she's sitting waiting in the hall for her father to come back. And after day after day after day, she realizes that he's not coming back. And she realizes it must be the gods who are responsible. So she builds a raft, nurses it. Her wrath grows and grows and grows like a storm. And she strides into the weapon room and dons a coat of mail and a helmet, and she chooses her weapons. And she doesn't need an army. She's powerful enough on her own, and she heads off to Asgard, doesn't she, Cathbad? And she reaches the wall and she cries out to the gods that she demands to see them. And they come out onto the walls of Asgard and they look down. And she is demanding justice for her father.
And well, Odin, being a war god and a mad poet, is not always a peacemaker, but he's got a giantess outside of his doors. And well, some of them are still trying to give the idea that the Aesir at least have some form of order to things. So they invite Skadi in to see if they can come to a deal, an arrangement, because when blood is spilled, then if it's not, well, if the blood isn't, if something's not done, if a thing doesn't happen, then that blood will be there and it'll burn through the rock until the problem is solved. So, Skadi, what compensation could be offered to you?
Skadi decides that her heart is broken, her father's dead, she's alone. So she says that she will not wage war on Asgard if she can choose a husband from the gods.
Ah, no problem. That's great. However, this is Skadi, and none of the Aesir are willing to step forward to be her husband. And in particular, she wants Balder, especially. That's the husband she really wants.
Cool.
So the gods decide, yeah, okay, they'll give her a husband, but there'll be a technique to choosing the husband to show that it's not just Balder that Skadi wants. You need to recognize. Well, if you really, really love Balder, you'll recognize him in any situation. So we'll just hold this cloak up across the whole of the hall, and you can pick your husband by his feet.
By his feet.
Yeah, look at the feet.
Easy. That should be easy. Balder is the most beautiful of all gods, so surely he will have the most beautiful feet. Easy. Skadi agrees to this in a heartbeat. Of course he's going to have the most beautiful feet. So they erect a big screen, and all the gods line up behind it, and they poke their toes out underneath the screen, and Skadi marches along and inspects each set of feet. And some are hairy, and some are smelly, some have mushrooms growing out between the toes. And yeah, she gets to the most beautiful, if there is such a thing, smooth, gorgeous feet. And she says, aha, I want him, that's Balder.
And the screen is lowered, and there's one god who spends most of his time with his feet in the sea, and the shingle rubs his feet clean and smooth, and his feet are the softest in the whole of all the realms. And of course, it's Njord. Well, it's not Balder, but Njord is pretty mighty. So that deal, you know, that might work. But then so you're not lonely. We've given you that. What's the second thing you want?
So Skadi accepted this deal, but there was a second part to the deal, and that was she wanted the gods to make her laugh, because it'd been so long since she'd laughed. And that task was presented to Loki.
So Skadi, the stony-faced, grieving, alienated from everything, needs to laugh. So Loki tries riddles, he tries songs, he tries wit. And then, being Loki, he goes out the hall to, one moment, here, give me some more of that mead. And then comes back in with a goat. Now, goats are fairly comical, especially all those good ones with curly horns. But even more comical than the goat is a goat that's got a bit of string tied around it. And because they bounce around and they jump and things. Have you seen those ones that jump up and they go boo and they fall over flat? Even more amusing to a particular type of humor is a goat that is tied to a bit of string at one end and then to a very sensitive collection of objects at the other end. Because then you can look at the goat bouncing around.
Ears?
You can look at Loki bouncing around, and you can look at Loki's face as he's tugged this way and that, and his stories get higher and higher. And with that capering, finally, the goat bounces up to Skadi, and Loki lands on her lap, and the ice melts.
The ice melts, and Skadi laughs, and it's a long, beautiful laugh. And as a parting gift, the gods take her father's eyes and they throw them up into the sky and make stars so that he'll always be looking down on her. But the end to this story isn't quite as simple, because Njord and Skadi were not well suited. She hated living with him near the sea. The seagulls kept her awake, and he hated living in the mountains. The wolves howling at night kept him awake. So they agreed to spend 9 nights at her home, 9 nights at his, and carry on like that.
And while they lived there was peace, but it didn't last.
Never does.
But everyone still remembers Loki's capers and remembers to laugh. And that was a good, genuine laugh before his mouth had been scarred. Well, yeah, feet are sometimes used as a euphemism for other parts of the body as well in storytelling. So you can imagine what Skadi was picking from.
Fabulous. Well, thank you both. That's a great little story to end on there. But I'll just share my screen again to talk you through the options if you've enjoyed this. The Facebook, Twitter and Instagram is either at Galloway Glens, which is the whole of the Galloway Glens scheme, or at GGLP Archaeology is the Can You Dig It one in particular. And both of them are full of a semi-continuous stream of goodness, daily goodness to your phone. But in particular, if you're interested in archaeology, Claire runs that one, and it is just absolutely full of fascinating facts about the area. So I can highly recommend that if you like to just get a fact a day. You can join our mailing list. You can email me at helen.kerran@dungal.gov.uk and I'll put you on our Can You Dig It mailing list. I don't send them out very often, but it's another way of staying in touch. We've got a website, obviously, gallowayglens.org, and you can see these and all of the other 14 recordings on our YouTube channel. Just search for Galloway Glens on YouTube and you'll see all the other ones there as well. This is the last one of the series at the moment, but we're coming back in April, I think, for these online events because we very much enjoyed them. But I'm giving up my chair for Wednesday evenings for a while in the new year to my compadre Nick Chisholm, project officer with the Galloway Glens. He focuses a lot more on the natural history of the Galloway Glens. So I know he's got some plans for salmon, genetic salmon trout genetics possibly, and black, oh I should know this, grouse, black grouse and white-fronted geese. So he's got a really interesting range of speakers lined up for that. So look out for that, the adverts will be out. But if it's archaeology that floats your boat, then the Can You Dig It is continuing, obviously, through and into 2022. So over the new year, we'll be starting a few short, we've got our My Galloway project, which is about updating My Canmore with information about your local area. That's a really interesting one. And we're mapping milestones in the area. We're going to move on to mapping named wells, holy wells and other wells in the area. And we've got some, we're planning some supported short-term research projects. Now, obviously, it depends on how the COVID restrictions go, but we're hoping those are going to be blended of a mixture of small groups on site, and then you'll be supported over a month to do some research, and then we'll wrap that up. You know, we'll do them quite time limited as a month. Find out something, and maybe Kells Churchyard looks like it'll be the first one. Do some really good research online, but as part of a little community, and we'll all come together either for real or online and share our findings and update each other on that. And then as the weather cheers up, we're going to be doing some guided walks of the area because there's so much history around. It's so interesting. So plenty going on for Can You Dig It? And as I say, social media and the mailing list are the best way to stay up to date with us. And we'll be back with this online programme in spring. So I think that was all that I wanted to say, apart from a big thank you to Claire in particular for all of her support over the last year. It's been really, really good. Working together, and of course to Cathbad and Olav. In real life, they're part of Cluaran Haven Historical Interpretation Project, which, as well as doing, you know, obviously in real life, you do a lot of reenactments and a lot of educational work in schools. Like everything, things have changed now. But if you've enjoyed this and you'd like some more of it, third Thursday of every month, you can join them for more Tales from the Longhouse. £3, very modest £3 entry, and you can get the tickets via Ticket Tailor. It's not Eventbrite, it's Ticket Tailor. Claire's put the link onto the website just now. So that's plenty more ways to fill up the Viking hole in your life. So that's fabulous. But we have got now, so I'm going to say do feel free to go. Obviously, you must feel free to go whenever you want. But if Cathbad and Olaf have got it in them, we'll just do 5 minutes more questions. So Alessandro, really interesting question, possibly also for Olaf, about the role of women in Viking society.
As much as I would like it to be different, I believe the role of women in Viking times was a pretty strong gendered role. I think the majority of women would have been running the home, having children, tending children, that kind of thing. Having said that, the power that Viking women had was reasonable. I mean, they can control the finances in the home, the running of the home. They could divorce their husbands, they could inherit money. So for the time, yeah, they had relative power, but they would have been having families really and running the home, which is absolutely nothing wrong with it.
It's nice to have a choice.
Yeah.
I read an article that was looking at lungs or evidence of lungs and cause of death. And the distinction tends to be between urban and rural. So in an urban environment, especially one that has another culture encroaching on it, the roles in life tend to get divided more, and the women tend to have more of a private, home-based thing, and this was backed up by the amount of soot in their lungs, basically. While the men maybe occupy a more public domain more, but in a rural environment, then that gender thing doesn't happen as much, because in a farm everyone's doing everything. And there's also Icelandic laws that not only say that women are allowed to speak at things, and they are obliged to represent their household at a public gathering in order to argue the case. Although I think in that law it was suggested that in the case of a murder or a death of one of their kin, it might be better if a man goes, because they're more emotional and would argue it more passionately. That's research from University of the Highlands and Islands. I can't remember the name of the researcher, I'm afraid.
It's a question we get all the time, and I find it fascinating because it's looking at the Viking world kind of through modern eyes. When you think about how important the role of women was, it's all very well being a warrior or a merchant, but if you don't have warm clothes to wear, because textiles aren't made, then you're not going to last long. If you're not able to forage things to make meals interesting, if you're not able to process food, then people starve. So this role was just as important as any other role at the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting about that Icelandic law, Cathbad, because Icelandic, Iceland stands out now as being one of the most gender neutral societies, doesn't it? So maybe they laid the foundations early. Brilliant. I hardly dare ask this because I know I know I should know the answer and I don't. But who were the Galgael? And can you expand?
So we're called Cluaran, which means thistle in Gaelic. But a lot of what we do is Viking. And there's a deliberate play with language there. And we talk about ourselves as coming from Cluaran Haven, or Thistle Harbour, which is layered language. I think I learned that from Galloway Glens. So there is a plus, yeah, so Gal Gael means foreign speakers of Gaelic, or foreign Gaels. And you find all throughout the west of Scotland, you find places where Norsemen, Scandinavians have come and they learn to speak Gaelic because they're living there. So there's the idea that the Galgael are the foreign Gaelic speakers or Vikings who have settled. Then also I think there's archaeology recently published from Orkney where they looked at the DNA of some Viking burials and it's indigenous to Scotland kind of thing. So you could say people from Scotland taking on Viking customs and going raiding as Norsemen. In Britain, we grew up language deficient. I think most people would have several different languages, and that's the early Galgael. Later on, Middle Ages, as the Viking, what could be described as the Viking era comes to an end, you get when you can't go cruising in your longship anymore, you get this inheritance of being hard men and hard fighters in Ireland and the west of Scotland, because they're pretty much the same thing if you have a boat. And they become the hardcore troops for the medieval armies. and they have gallowglass axes, and they're the gallowglass, and maybe the gallowglass are the kind of continuation of the Gallowgale. Perhaps there are always more questions than there are answers. So if an answer looks easy, then you need to think of the questions that haven't been thought of.
And I think that I think that's very interesting. One thing I've learned through this process is that we're especially, like you say, here in the west of Scotland, we're a layered language, layered upon itself over the generations. So, well, more than generations, centuries. And another Galloway Glens project is place names of the Galloway Glens. So I've just put a link to it in the chat. Gilbert Marcus has been doing a lot of research, and it is very Galloway Glens specific. So it's just this little area of southwest Scotland. But how many has he got, Claire? Thousands of place names, and he's created a searchable database, and you can get the link to it through there. And so you can see, and with that as well, you can see the layering of the languages one on top of the other as people came and went and left their mark behind. So I think that fascinating to me. So that's well worth a look, that searchable database of place names of the Galloway Glens. Yeah.
And another question was, Galloway was part of the Kingdom of Strathclyde where they spoke Welsh. Can you comment?
Welsh is foreign and Saxon, so they speak Cymric. So is it Strathnith is where Dumfries is, the strath of the River Nith that heads up to the strath of the River Clyde. I love Vikings. I love Viking stories, but I also like, having chosen the name Cathbad and Culdee, I love the British stories and the Irish stories. So Strathclyde is an awesome kingdom, and archaeology is just coming out that kind of gives it more of an identity, because it's usually described by other people. But it could be the Kingdom of Britons that changes shape and goes right back to the Romans. So this week when I was researching, I looked at a letter from Patrick, who probably was born in Britain, and he complains to another Roman named person about them taking slaves and acting in a way that we would describe as being very similar to Vikings. And that's in the 4th century, I think, 5th century. And then 400 years later, Adaman, just on the cusp of what we call the Viking era from the Scottish perspective, is writing the Law of Innocence, where 56 kings from all around Britain swear that they won't attack innocents, like women and children, in battle. They'll protect them, and they'll pay a fine if their armies do attack them. And so you've got this whole period of 5 centuries, maybe, of after Rome bringing an understanding of peace, United Nations almost, Declaration of Human Rights, you might think it. And then you get warriors who don't subscribe to that code, taking out Lindisfarne and Iona in consecutive years and breaking that peace. But it does stir things up a bit, and Strathclyde can re-emerge when Northumbria is attacked and falls apart. But yeah, sorry, I'm a storyteller. That's my story understanding of it. There are all sorts of place name bits and archaeology that give more evidence to support what is my take on it.
No, that was good. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Well, I should also say, while we're all here, that it's been announced very recently that the Galloway Hoard is coming back to Kirkcudbright, which is exciting news, and I think it's going to be summer next year, and I think it's coming for 9 months or something, which is pretty amazing. So around that, there'll be we're obviously going to try and make a big deal of that, because it is a big deal. It was found here and it's come back here after its exhibition at the National Museum of Scotland, which would be fantastic too. But I think we are very much hoping and expecting to have some sort of Viking encampment around that time. So we were planning to do it this spring. So that won't buy the board. But I think, should we say late summer or autumn of 2021? Look out for the Vikings on the banks of Loch Ken, and come and join them, because I think it'll be excellent and will be tied in with the Galloway Hort celebrations.
Yeah, you
So,
can hammer yourself some armbands.
Yes, there's all sorts.
If you have the silver to trade.
Yeah. Fabulous. Right, I think we're going to call it a day.
Yes,
And thank you all for coming, as ever. It's been really a lot of fun.